They never said it outright, but it was in every glance, every careful silence, every time my name was skipped in a toast. I was the one who didn't figure it out. While my sister Vivian, she was the success story. Polished, poised. PR executive with a client list longer than her patience. And me, I worked in spreadsheets, consultant for small businesses, nothing glamorous, nothing worth mentioning in group chats. At family dinners, when people asked what I did, my mother would smile tight and say, "Nora? Oh, she's freelancing, finding herself still." No one ever asked me directly. Vivian would always chime in just as I opened my mouth. "She's great at Excel," she once laughed, sipping wine. Like scary good. The table laughed too. Even I forced a smile. I wasn't a failure, but I had learned it was easier to play along than to correct them. They needed a role for me in this story they told the world, and I'd become the family's soft punchline, the one who didn't quite launch. What they didn't know was that while they were passing appetizers and praise, I was quietly building something far from their spotlight. Something they'd all benefit from, without ever knowing it had my name on it, and I would have kept it that way. Until the night of the gala, the night I realized they'd deleted me from the narrative entirely. It was a Tuesday night. I was eating takeout in my kitchen, half watching an old documentary when my phone buzzed. Group chat. Family core. My stomach always tightened when that name popped up. Vivian had posted photos, dozens of them. A grand ballroom, chandelier lighting, velvet drapes, champagne towers, and there she was, center frame, arm in arm, with our parents. Perfect smile, that signature emerald dress she saved for magazine shoots. The caption read, "So proud of this moment. Whitman PR signs the biggest deal of the year." With my family by my side, I kept scrolling, cousins, aunts, even my brother flew in from Oregon. Everyone was there, except me. There wasn't even a mention, not a text, not a heads up, not a seat with my name, just one photo after another. My family celebrating Vivian's milestone like it was theirs. Like I didn't exist, but it wasn't just the exclusion that burned. It was the realization that they chose to make me invisible. Vivian had rewritten the narrative to fit her spotlight, and in that moment, something shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and opened my laptop, because what they didn't know was that behind every deal she bragged about, there was my signature. I didn't respond to the photos, didn't ask why I wasn't invited, didn't text Vivian, didn't call my parents. I just disappeared from the conversation. Let them think I was too busy, or too bitter, or too broken. It didn't matter anymore. I told myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need their approval, that I didn't need to be seen. But the truth, it still stung. Even after all these years, it still stung. There's something about being forgotten on purpose. Not because they lost track of you, but because they decided you didn't belong in their version of the story. And for a moment, I almost believed them. Maybe I really was the failure. The background extra in Vivian's production, so I shut the laptop, fed the dog, washed the dishes like nothing happened, because sometimes it's easier to stay small than to rise and risk the fall. That night, I went to bed thinking it would pass, that I could let it go. I didn't know then that my name, my signature, was already sitting in the center of her empire, waiting. It started with a phone call I almost didn't take. "Hey, Whitman Consulting?" The voice was familiar, warm. "Just wanted to say congrats. I saw your name buried in the back pages of the VPR executive contracts. Didn't know you were branching into silent capital." I froze. "Sorry," I said, carefully. "Can you repeat that?" He did, twice. And just like that, the pieces began clicking into place. You see, years ago when Vivian launched her PR agency, I was already building something of my own, something less flashy, more foundational. Through a network of shell companies and proxy investors, I had become a quiet force behind several mid-tier agencies. One of them bought out 34% of VPR last fall. Vivian never connected the dots. She only knew her firm had new backers, fresh capital, and stricter reporting lines. She had no idea that I had signed off on those lines, that the digital signature, buried in her funding paperwork, was mine. I didn't do it out of spite. Back then, I just wanted to build something real, with or without recognition. But now I had a front row seat to the empire she was parading around like it was hers. Alone. And she had no idea the seat was reserved for me. A week later, I received the email. Subject line, quarterly payroll authorization. Digital signature required. It was routine, procedural, just a PDF with a secure DocuSign field at the bottom. The numbers were all familiar. Executive compensation, client bonuses, monthly draws, and there it was. Vivian's name. Line item, $28,750, CEO compensation. My heart didn't race, my fingers didn't shake, I just read it. Slowly. Then clicked the signature box. Nora Whitman, Principal Fund. Administrator. One click, one breath, and suddenly she was cashing my check. She still didn't know. No one did. Yet. That was the power of staying in the background long enough for people to stop looking at you entirely. They forget to hide things. They forget to ask permission. They forget who's quietly holding the pen. I closed the laptop and made myself tea. No victory dance, no smug grin, just the kind of silence that comes when you finally realize you don't need to yell to own the room. Let her think she was untouchable. Let them all toast her genius. Because when the next meeting came and they asked who approved her paycheck, my name would already be on it. The next board meeting was virtual. 10 little boxes on a Zoom screen. Suits, smiles, Vivian, center frame, perfect lighting, perfect lipstick. She ran the room like a conductor, charming the investors, nodding through budget slides she hadn't written. Not once did she say my name, not even when she proudly announced, thanks to our funding partner, whomever they are, we're scaling. Faster than projected. A couple of the newer board members glanced at me. Quiet curiosity, they knew. But Vivian, she thought I was just a compliance monitor. Another ghost in the machine, and honestly, I let her think that. That was the test, because in the weeks that followed, I watched her make mistake after mistake, smiling through them like she was invincible. She rerouted marketing funds into a side project called VGlow, a beauty brand she claimed would soft launch through influencers. Except it wasn't cleared. It wasn't approved. And the money was traced back to my capital. I sent a quiet request for a formal breakdown of expenditures. Her assistant replied, Vivian asked me to tell you she'll explain it off record. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Behind the scenes, I had one ally, a man named Daniel, head of compliance. He'd been looped in on everything. He called me one night and said, you know she's naming herself sole brand director on the VGlow trademark? I paused. Under her personal LLC? He exhaled. Yeah. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a sister desperate for the spotlight. This was someone who would steal what she thought no one was watching. So I did what I've always done. Best I documented. Every wire transfer, every invoice, every name she dropped in interviews while ignoring mine. She wanted the credit. She could have it. Because when it all came crashing down, the receipts wouldn't whisper. They'd roar. The board summoned an emergency strategy session. Vivian called it herself. To reset expectations and showcase leadership, her assistant said. What she didn't know was that she'd be walking into a room where every illusion she built would fracture. I didn't book a flight right away. I waited, watched the email chain grow, watched her attach glowing press releases and branding decks full of stolen vision. Then, without a word, I reserved a seat at the table. Not a virtual square on a screen, a real chair. In the boardroom, she thought she owned. The night before the flight, I laid out my outfit. Not black. Not bold. A deep navy suit. Clean lines. Neutral polish. Simple heels. Nothing said revenge. Everything said, I belong here. I practiced what I'd say, then erased half of it. Because the most powerful truth didn't need dressing. I packed lightly. No entourage, no announcement, just a portfolio with one document inside. Vivian's signed compensation approval. With my name printed beneath it. She wouldn't see me coming, not until I was already seated, and by then she'd be too busy. Smiling for the room to realize the woman sitting quietly in the back was the one who held the match. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. I didn't speak to anyone, just nodded at the receptionist, signed the visitor log, and walked in like I'd done it 100 times. The nameplate at the end of the table was blank. I sat there. Vivian swept in 15 minutes late, her usual entrance. The room shifted, laughter, air kisses, her favorite power scent trailing behind her. She wore red. Of course she did. She didn't even see me at first. She opened with slides, numbers, buzzwords. Brand synergy. Global pivot. All. Show. Then she launched into her next announcement. A new division. VGlow. Entirely my concept, she said. She thanked the board. Thanked the unnamed funding partners for believing in her. Still hadn't looked at me. That's when the chairman interrupted. Before we proceed, he said, we'd like to acknowledge the executive who's been quietly reviewing all compensation. Structures, including yours, Vivian. She blinked. I wasn't told about that. Everyone turned to me. So I opened the portfolio, slid one page across the table. Her paycheck. Dated last quarter. Line by line. And at the bottom, in crisp digital font, Nora Whitman. She stared at it. Once, then again. The room fell into silence. My voice didn't rise. I simply said, you've been cashing checks you thought came from strangers, but every dollar that hit your account passed through my hands first. Someone dropped a pen. The legal counsel adjusted his glasses. Vivian's mouth opened, but nothing came out. VGlow, I continued, was funded with misallocated money. That money is traceable, every cent, including the personal transfers to your LLC. She finally spoke. You set me up. No, I said. You built a brand on credit you didn't check. She tried to laugh, tried to spin it, but the damage was already done. Someone in the room was recording. Another was emailing legal. Vivian's voice cracked. I'm your sister, I stood, and I was the failure, remember? Then I walked out. No one followed me into the hallway. The echo of the glass doors closing behind me felt louder than the entire meeting. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. For the first time in years, it felt like oxygen. Behind me, they were still scrambling. Vivian trying to spin, explain, salvage. But there's a silence that comes after truth is spoken out loud. And it doesn't. Let you bargain with it. A junior associate caught up to me near the elevators. She looked barely 25. Ms. Whitman, I didn't know you were... I stopped her with a nod. You weren't supposed to. She hesitated, then said softly, she always made it sound like you didn't do anything. I stepped into the elevator. That's the thing about silence, I said. It's not weakness, it's just waiting for the right moment. The key... Doors closed. I didn't need a mic drop, or an apology, or applause from the same people who once looked past me. All I needed was that signature, one clean line, mine, and she'll never be able to erase it again. The next morning, the emails began. First, from compliance, then legal. Then the auditors I had quietly retained 3 months earlier. Every transfer, every side deal, every branded box of VGlow serum that had been labeled gifted but billed as R&D was now part of a formal investigation. Vivian didn't know it yet, but the storm had already started before she even walked into that boardroom. I didn't need to press charges. Didn't need to write a press release. All I had to do was let it run. Clients started pulling out, one by one. First the mid-sized tech firm from Austin, then the skincare giant she'd been trying to court for 2 years. The brand she built on borrowed credit and borrowed charm was unraveling. And I wasn't behind the curtain pulling strings. I wasn't even in the building anymore. I was working from my own office now, 4 blocks away but a world apart. Same clients, new firm, this time under my name. People started noticing. Not because I told them, but because the truth has a way of bleeding through even the most polished branding. Vivian could keep her Instagram filters. I had the paperwork, and in the end, that was all that mattered. It wasn't sudden. There was no front-page article, no dramatic confrontation in the street, just a shift. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a Women in Business roundtable. The event coordinator emailed, "We'd love to hear your story, your real one." I said yes, not because I needed validation, but because it was time. I walked into the venue, and there it was, my name, on the program, on the screen. Nora Whitman, founder, strategist, silent architect turned leader. People shook my hand differently now, looked me in the eye, not because I was louder, but because I was no longer hiding. I didn't mention Vivian. I didn't need to. What mattered was that the story had been rewritten, this time by me. Later that week, I moved into my new office space. Top floor, no plaque yet. The only thing on the wall, a single framed document, her old paycheck, my signature at the bottom. I don't keep it there to gloat. I keep it as a reminder of the years they overlooked me, of the quiet work that built an empire beneath their feet, and of the moment everything changed. Not because I fought louder, but because I stopped apologizing for being the one they underestimated. They called me the failure. Now they spell my name correctly. They never apologized. Not Vivian, not my parents, not the family who used to send me job listings like pity notes, and that's okay. Some stories don't end with closure, some just end. But I didn't return for apologies. I returned with something else, a signature, though. Same one they once called worthless, the same one that now decides whether or not their paycheck's clear. Vivian still exists somewhere in the echo of her old brand, occasionally tagged in old press articles, still clinging to borrowed buzzwords. But she's no longer the star of my story. I didn't need to destroy her. I didn't even need revenge. I just needed to reclaim what was always mine. The right to be seen, the right to be heard, the right to leave a mark that no one could erase. That's the thing about a signature. It looks small, simple, a flick of ink, a line across a page, but it's a declaration that you were here, that you mattered, that something began with you. They told everyone I was a failure. But when it mattered most, when the paper hit the desk, when the numbers needed approval, when the name at the bottom meant everything, it was mine.